Hello, everyone, and good morning. Today, we have our fearless leader with MakeMo, Oleg Kagan. He is going to present on operating systems, the very basics. So let's go ahead and get started with operating systems, the very basics. Welcome, Oleg. Welcome back.
Thank you very much, Adriana. I appreciate the introduction and I appreciate you hosting today's program. And hello, everybody. Welcome to Operating Systems, the Very Basics. This is a program and a topic that I'm pretty enthusiastic about. And I was wondering before I came up with the content for this program, why folks would come to a program called operating systems, the very basics. Operating systems aren't exactly a topic that most people get excited about. However, what I came to, the conclusion that I've reached is that the people who are here are enthusiastic about learning about computers. People want to know what an operating system is, what it does, and how it affects them. And so me being a bit of a computer nerd, a non-programmer, English major in college, but still a person who's interested in computer history and interested in providing digital literacy resources to all you folks out there, I've put together a presentation that I think touches on what operating systems are and some basics of why they're important to you. Now, if you have questions during the session, please, by all means, put them in the Q&A. You could definitely chat with us during the presentation, but I would say that if you have questions, the best place is the Q&A, because then we could see them all in a row and we can get to them either in the middle of the presentation or after the presentation. Now, I'm going to be using a lot of terms that may be unfamiliar to the average computer user. Now, that being the case, if you hear a term that I fail to explain and you're not sure what it is, please put in the chat, Oleg, stop, I don't know what X means. And I will stop and by all means explain what that term is, including any acronyms or other things. Now, if I don't know what it means, then I'm going to look it up right here and I'm going to tell you, or I'm going to tell you about it in the follow-up email. And as our regular attendees to our digital literacy classes know, I always send a follow-up email after the event. And that follow-up email includes a link to the recording of this event, as well as the PowerPoint slides and other links that I mentioned during the presentation. You can always respond to that follow-up email with other questions or any comments you have. All right. I am going to go ahead and start my presentation. Get the share screen going, and we'll dive into operating systems. All right, let's see here. Press F5, and that should make this full screen, and we're off to the races. So when you saw this program in the e-newsletter or wherever you saw it on our website, this was the event description. You're going to be learning what is an operating system. How do they help you with your daily computing? We're going to explore the basics of operating systems, such as the most popular Windows, macOS, and Linux, and learn about their key features and services. Now, let me ask you this in the chat. If you're familiar with the operating system that you're using, can you quickly put that in the chat? I'm curious what kind of operating system everybody uses. We start off with a lot of Macs. That's okay if you don't know. That's why you're here. Oh, see, some people are putting in the specific operating system that you're using. Even the version of it. So we have a lot of Windows 10, we have macOS Catalina. And let's see, a lot of macOS. Any Linux users out there? I'm really curious. Some Chromebook. So Chromebook has the Chrome OS, which is Google's operating system.
A few are in the Q&A sharing that they're
Mhm.
using Linux.
Oh, somebody's using, ooh, which version? Well, I mean, which
Um,
distribution? Does it say? Let me see.
it just says Linux.
At home, I have Teresa has Linux. Does she know which one? At home, I use Ubuntu. I'm gonna write that in the chat. I've had Linux on my personal computer for a pretty long time. So we had a question, how come I can only see my own response? The reason for that is because the chat is set up in a way that we can see, Adriana and I can see everybody's responses, but attendees can't see each other's responses. That way everybody can focus on the presentation. So I use the Ubuntu operating system, and that's a version of Ubuntu, which is a distribution of Linux. Linux is kind of the third operating system. I'll be talking about it a little bit later on in the presentation. So it's good. Okay, so we have a lot of Windows, a lot of Macs. So we're pretty well represented here, and the fact that somebody actually uses Linux is pretty delightful. So yeah, she doesn't know which distribution of Linux she uses, and that's fine. Actually, I installed Linux for my parents as well on their computer, and they probably don't know which one it is either, and it doesn't matter. All it matters is that it works. So we had a question about Google Chrome. So people who use Chromebooks use an operating system called Chrome OS. OS stands for operating system, which is a operating system Google developed specifically for their Chromebook laptops. All right, so let's go ahead and move in to what an operating system is. So for those who don't know, you're going to know now an operating system or an OS is the very main software that controls how your computer interacts with both the hardware. So we're talking about the monitor, the motherboard, the video card, the sound card, all that stuff inside your computer, and the user, which is you. So the operating system controls how things look, and also it communicates with the applications that you run on your computer. So everything that you run on your computer, for instance, a web browser or Zoom, operates on top of your operating system. And your operating system is doing all this work behind the scenes, managing the memory the software uses, the processing resources that the software uses. So that's the basics of what an operating system is. Now, why are we even doing a program like this? Why are we even teaching about operating systems? Now, it may be obvious now because an operating system is probably the most important piece of software that you have on your computer. And it makes sense. We use an operating system every day. You can't avoid using an operating system if you use a computer. Having knowing which operating system you use and knowing a little bit about operating systems helps inform your decisions about what computer to buy, how you want to use that computer, and in general, what you do on your computer and maybe what you shouldn't do on your computer. We'll be talking towards the end about the different ways to decide on what operating system should you use and if you're using the right one. Knowing about operating system also gives you the big picture view of the way computers work. So many people come to our digital literacy courses trying to get a picture of the sort of the computing landscape. Because when you start to use a computer, after not having used computers, or if you only do really one thing on a computer, for example, if you just surf the internet, you don't really have a big picture view of what computers are, how computers work, what is what. And learning about operating systems gives you a very important piece of that big picture view. And of course, I put the more you know here. Some people may recognize that as a slogan that appeared on TV, I think in the 90s and early 2000s. And so why learn about operating systems? Because it's fun to know things. All right. let's see here. Oh, we had a question. What is a peripheral? A peripheral is something that you connect to your computer, for example, a printer. So you connect that to your computer and it's peripherally used by your computer. You can also connect speakers to your computer, but generally a printer would be the best example of what a peripheral is. Oh, what is the best operating system and for what purpose is it more efficient? Oh, we'll be talking a little bit about that later, but that's a really hard question to answer because it depends on what you need it for and whether an operating system works for you. So let's move on. So examples of operating systems. So I put here, I put here the 3 top operating systems in the world for desktop computers. So 75% of users in the world are desktop computer users or laptop computer users use Windows, 15% use Mac operating system or Mac OS, and 5% use Linux. And as you can see the Windows logo on top, the Mac logo, which is now just text, is just a font, and then the Linux logo, which is the tux, the penguin. And now what is not mentioned here is that many operating systems are now on people's phones. So when your phone has an operating system as well, and the great majority of people who use phones use the Android operating system, which is a Linux-based system created by Google. That's the Android operating system. And of course, also iPhone has, Apple has its own operating system for iPhones, and there are also other operating systems for phones. But for the most part, we're talking about Mac OS, Windows, Linux, Android, and the iPhone operating systems. Those are probably the vast majority of users in the world are using those operating systems. All right. And then, so an operating system, it has a definite place in the computing landscape, as you have already gathered. So I found this really useful graphic to show you where in the kind of, I guess, the stack of your computer use the operating system lives. So it all starts with hardware, which is the things you can see and touch. And then if you think of booting up your computer or starting up your computer, the very first thing you usually see when you start up your computer, at least if your computer is X number of years old now, it's just the Windows logo or the Mac logo. But in the past, when you started a computer, there was usually either the little Energy Star icon or some other thing. That was the BIOS, the basic output system. The BIOS lives right above the hardware. It's something called firmware, which is kind of in between hardware and software. The firmware lives inside and is sort of built into the hardware, and it's the piece of software closest to the hardware. And so the BIOS usually would check, oh, you've turned on your computer. You have this disk drive, you have this keyboard, you have this monitor, and it would get your computer started, and then it would hand things over to the operating system. The operating system is controlled by a kernel, which is the very central part of an operating system. Operating systems do a whole lot of things at the same time, but the kernel is the thing right in the middle that controls all of the basic stuff. So it starts with, you go hardware, BIOS, and then the kernel. What a kernel does, here's some technical language here, it schedules processes. And when we talk about processes here, we talk about all those details that the computer does at any one time. Processes that we're not going to be talking about in today's program just because it gets really complicated. Resource allocation, such as where does the computer memory go? Because everything in computers has to do with memory, whether that's RAM, random access memory, which is used quickly and given up quickly as your computer does everything and just is staying on, to memory like your hard drive. So it allocates resources in terms of memory, in terms of power, processing power. Device management, devices we're talking about like the peripherals, like printers, like microphones, like video cameras. Interrupt handling, actually, I don't even know what that is. We talk about memory management and process management. So these are things that the kernel is, all of these things that run your computer. So that's at the core of the operating system. The next step is the shell. Now it's called a shell because it's on the outside of the operating system, and it's what the user tends to interact with. And there are different kinds of shells. And now we're going to get a little bit into computing history. So what we see on the left hand of this slide is what we call a command line. It's a text-based interface, and it's usually what you see in hacker movies. And people still use command line. What it actually ends up being is just a bunch of text on your screen that starts with, at the very top, let me see if I can draw, I'm going to show you. It starts with this right here, the C colon slash or backslash. This is the C drive or the hard drive. This is a MS-DOS terminal window. It's a MS-DOS command line window, and MS-DOS or command was something that was, it's an operating system that was built underneath Windows. It came before Windows, and then Windows was built on top of it. Now this is called command line when it still exists in Windows. It's just not DOS anymore, but it looks the same and uses similar commands. So it starts with this. On Linux, it looks a little different. On Mac, it looks a little different, but essentially it's just a line and you type directions in here. So dir is a direction that lets you see what files are in a directory. So here we went to the directory temp and type dir, and it shows you the different files here. So it looks complicated, but actually all we have here is the date the file is modified, the time, whether there's another directory in here, so whether there's another folder within temp, and then here are just the files. This is the size of the files right here. And here is the different file types that are within here. And here, down here on the bottom, it tells you how big the files are, how many files there are, how many directories are, and how much space they take up. So command line is very intimidating for beginner computer users. And that, I believe, is why computer scientists and programmers and developers of technology and software decided to create graphical user interfaces. A graphical user interface is exactly what you think it is. It is a graphical depiction of what we see in the command line. So let me clear my screen here. So this is a control panel window from the operating system Windows 3.1, which is really the very first usable version of Windows. It's really what brought Windows to the forefront of operating systems. And we know what a control panel is. It's where all of the I don't know, the settings are within your computer. So here you can see the basics, the different, you can control the colors, you control the fonts, the ports, which are the plugs. So computer has different plugs. Your computer does, and every computer has, and they used to look more like this. Now they're a little bit smaller and slightly more svelte. You can control how the mouse operates. You can control what the desktop looks like. Keyboard, even though this control panel is from a operating system from approximately 1993, maybe 1994, a lot of these things are exactly the same as what an operating system controls to this very day. But when it comes to the way it looks, most people still use graphical user interfaces. So what do we see here on the left side? This command line actually looks like something like this if you do a very basic graphical user interface. So this is still text-based, but you can actually see what the directory looks like instead of only it's broken up using graphics in the screen. So this is an example of a file manager. called Norton Commander, which was a really, really simple, I don't know if you even want to call it an operating system, but it's a very simple graphical user interface based written on top of MS-DOS. So you can see down at the bottom is you have the command line, C:/ and the little bracket there. And so you could technically type things here, but you don't have to, because you can use either a mouse or you can use your arrow buttons to select, for example, config sys. You can select the drive that you want to access. And you can see all the different files within here. It's a little bit prettier than just looking at your terminal window or your command line window. So this is kind of the intermediary between what the graphical user interface, which we most of us use today, and the command line interface. Now, programmers still sometimes will use the command line. I know I use the command line when I study programming a lot, because it's easier and oftentimes faster than having to navigate all sorts of folders and windows. Norton Commander was around between 1986 and 1998, and the Norton you see here is actually the same Norton as Norton Antivirus. That was before they were purchased by Symantec. So I remember using Norton Commander as one of the first operating systems, one of the first ways that I interacted with computers. So that's why I put it here. It's a little bit of a trip down memory lane, but it's also a good way for you to see what the intermediary step is between the command line and a graphical user interface. Now, there are the three most popular operating systems in the world, and we'll cover those in just a moment. But Adriana, would you mind showing folks what a Mac operating system looks like in real time? I have to stop my video and mute for just a moment.
Yeah, no problem. Okay. Oh, you have to stop sharing. Okay, so this is my screen with my background here at the top. I have my toolbar, but I also have my menu here at the bottom. And what I like about Macs is that it's very customizable. Like you can customize it like your layout. So if I want like my menu to stay, it can stay here. Or if I want it to disappear when I'm not using it, I can do that too. But what I also like is that I can change, like even the corners of my screen have a different function. So if I move my corner to the top right, everything that's in the middle would spread apart. If I wanted to come back and show my other screens, it would pop up right here. And I'm not going to do it because I don't know what it's going to do. But if I move my mouse to the bottom bottom left corner, it's going to put my laptop to sleep. But there's a lot of different other options with Mac where you can customize it. I'm very new to Mac, so I'm still getting to know it. But one thing that I found out today is like how to find out what kind of operating system I have. So your Apple here is your go-to. So if I want to shut down, restart, put it to sleep, force quit, or learn more about my Mac, it's going to show me right here all of the information. So as you can see, my version is macOS Monterey, and it has all of the other information that if I need to know what it is. Other information is the display, so any hardware, the amount of storage, the support, and resources. This is all new stuff that I'm exploring myself. What other questions? What other things should I browse? Oleg? Oh. um,
Oh, I'm back.
oh, okay.
So if you want to show, actually, if you want to show people what the control panel looks like, I think that's always
Oh
interesting
yeah,
to
thank you
look
for
at.
reminding me. So here's my launch pad. So this tells me all of the apps that I have on this computer. And of course, I have my system preferences. So if I need to make adjustments, I can make them here. This is where I told you about where I can change the dock. I can change the size of it. If I want it small, if I want it large. Any Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, display sound is all going to be here under system preferences. And what was the control dock you said?
The control panel, because I think you just showed it a second ago, actually.
Oh yeah.
The
Well,
system
it's called a
preferences,
launch pad.
the launch pad, yeah. So
Yes,
go
it's
back, go back to
called,
it,
this is called a launch pad.
and then go to system preferences. So the fun thing about these system preferences is that we saw Windows 3.1 a little while ago, and we can see how similar. I mean, this is an exact example because we have them practically side by side. We have them minutes apart here on the screen, and how similar the settings are between what it was 20, 30 years ago and what they are now. Even though so many things have changed and technology has progressed with operating systems and computers in general, capabilities and better graphics, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, the basics of computing, even though they seem like they change so rapidly, are actually very similar. And the reason for that is that people do, relatively speaking, similar things on computers. So thank you, Adriana, for showing off your desktop and your operating system. I wanted you to do that partially because, like, I'm a geek. I really like to see how different operating systems look like. And I've used multiple operating systems, and it's always interesting to me to learn how to use different operating systems. Different operating systems really have, it's almost like they have different visual languages. So if you do use different versions of Windows, they're relatively similar in how you approach them. If you use different versions of Mac, even though the way they look sometimes will change, the way that you right click and left click, the way that you access your file manager, all tend to be similar. But it's fun to see. So I often look at screenshots of different distributions of Linux and different operating systems. And that's partially why I'm excited about showing you what Norton Commander looks like too. All right, so let's move on to the most popular operating systems. So Windows is the world's most popular operating system at the moment, though I would say in our audience, we have quite a lot of Mac users. I wouldn't even say that we have 15% of our attendees as Mac users. It's probably more. I think in places in large cities, especially in California, Apple has become really prevalent. But throughout the world, Windows tends to still be the biggest operating system, and that goes for personal use and also for businesses, which tend to use computers maybe even more than individual users. So Windows was first founded it was first created and released in 1985, but really didn't gain a lot of traction until the early 90s with Windows 3.1. Now you can see here, this is what a typical Windows desktop looks like. It has a taskbar on the very bottom. Let me start to notate this a little bit, but I'm going to make my pencil a little bit thicker because I think it's a little bit hard to see otherwise. So we have this. Oh, this is not the right color. We need a better color. Let's do this one. There we go. Slightly more. So this right here is called a taskbar. What we have down here tends to be the different programs that you're using. They'll appear in this area right here. And then we have the date and calendar on the bottom right hand, and some of the other pieces of software that are routinely running, and also some settings. So we have like the sound settings down here. We have the Wi-Fi settings down on the bottom right hand side. We have the battery indicator if you're using a laptop. We have a quick launch bar here so you can adjust what icons you have here. So if you don't want to have icons all over your desktop to launch things really quickly, you can also have them down on the bottom right here. And here on this right here is something that Windows made really, really popular and persists as one of Windows's kind of signature items, and that's the start menu. When many people learned about computers for the first time, one of the first things they learned, they turn on the computer, everything gets started up, and then how do you access your programs? You either click on them, you double click on them on your desktop, or you use the start menu. You click the Windows logo. It used to say start in earlier versions of Windows. You click the start menu, and then you have access to your folders, documents, or search or run. So run it essentially opens up a little command line, so you can actually run programs using just run. And on my personal computer, I actually have a keyboard shortcut. So for those who don't know what a keyboard shortcut is, there are shortcuts on the keyboard. There are buttons that you press on the keyboard to access different options on your computer, different functionalities on your computer really, really quickly. And so people who are computer power users tend to learn the shortcuts. So on my Linux computer, I press the Command R, and it opens up a little run thing and a little menu of programs, and I just type in the programs and it'll automatically finish. So my software browser, my internet browser is called Vivaldi. So I'll press Command R, VIV. So I don't even have to type in the whole thing because it finishes it for me. I press enter, and that's how I start my browser. I don't have to click the start menu and all that. I just do it really quickly. And so you can also do that on Windows by hitting Windows key R, and it'll open up the run icon. As long as you know what to type in there, you can start things up pretty quickly. But I'm doing a tangent here. So this is what the basic Windows desktop looks like. And if we move on, here is a Mac OS. So this is Mac OS 10. So this is a little bit outdated. This is new versions of operating systems are constantly being released. Sometimes they make small changes to the operating system, and sometimes operating systems look a whole lot different between different versions. So I know that Windows, between, for example, Windows XP and Windows 11, you might not even recognize it as the same operating system, though there are many things that under the surface that are actually remain somewhat similar, if not just updated. So this is Mac OS. So I don't know the exact names of some of these things, but I know what we have down here is, I believe, and Adriana, correct me if I'm wrong, what we have down here is called the launcher. And so it's similar in some ways to quick launch icons on Windows, but Mac had it first. This icon right here, this is an old Mac logo, but I really like this logo. This is called a Finder. When you click the Finder, it'll bring up a file manager and a search box, so you can really quickly get to the different programs or documents you have on your computer.
It's just called a dock.
Oh, the dock? Okay.
Yeah.
That works. Yeah, if there are Mac users out there in the audience, you can also chime in if I get the terminology wrong.
I'm also new to it too, so yeah.
Yeah. So we have a trash can here, similar to the recycle bin. If you're no longer using something, you want to delete something like a document that you don't want anymore, you can put it in the trash. And many things are the same. So we have icons on the desktop in the same way as you do on Windows computers. You double click them, it'll open them. We have the organization through folders is pretty much the same on Mac. That what you might notice is that it looks different. There are different kinds of icons. There are menus that come up on the top here. Even if you don't have a program open, you can see that there's this space on the very top is used as a menu. And also you can see that what we had on Windows on the bottom right-hand side, we have on the bottom left, on the top right-hand side on a Mac. So we've got these drawings are starting to get a little bit wild. You can see the battery. You can see the Wi-Fi. You can see the Bluetooth connections. So different icons mean different things. You can see the language and the volume control. Now here you can see Macintosh HD. HD, of course, stands for hard drive, and that's the computer's memory. So if you go in here, you can locate the files that are on your hard drive. And a hard drive is a physical thing that's inside your computer that stores your files. It also stores your operating system. I'm going to quickly go in the chat and see if there are questions. I have a Mac. Did you say Launchpad? Launchpad. So like a rocket launches. Although lunch is coming up, so I could really go into a Launchpad.
Pardon. Yes, lunch. I'm gonna.
Launchpad.
Yeah, I can during. Yeah, there's the launch pad. It is an application on the dock. So, like if you can see where the bottom where you see the CD, there is a launch pad.
It's this right here.
Yes, there's a application there, and within that application, it shows you all of your applications that are available on your Mac. So it's an easy access to all of your applications if you don't have them on your dock. So for example, if I want to access my webcam on my Mac, it's not on my dock. So what I do is I go to launch and I look for it. So it's just another easy way to look for all of my applications.
Yep. So what you might not know, or you might not think about when you use your computer on a regular basis, that almost everything that you see on your computer is a piece of software, is an application. So most people don't think of something like the launcher, or Launchpad, or the dock as an app, but the dock is actually a separate app that is controlled by your operating system, is running on top of your operating system. The file manager, so when you access folders and you see a list of the folders that are in your computer, that's a separate application that is run with usually it comes with your operating system. At least when you have Windows and Mac, it's usually sort of built into the operating system. But it's a whole separate application. There are programmers who work on just the file manager or just the dock. Because if you think about it, the dock has all sorts of behaviors. It has probably hundreds of different behaviors that it does. And when people code operating system, when they write the code for operating system, they decide exactly what the dock will do at any time in the computer's functioning. It's such an interesting thing to think about. It's wild because everything we do on a computer is programmed by somebody, and the decision is made. Like even this little doodad, even the little arrow that shows right here, that shows you that you've selected the Finder. Somebody had decided, or that you have it open, somebody had decided that little caret there shows you is how the person's going to know that it was open. A user interface designer made that decision. When I consider operating systems and consider all those decisions that were made to use them, it makes my brain buzz and makes my brain tingle. All right, so this is the Mac OS. And then let's really quickly move on to Linux. Linux is an operating system that was first created in September 17th of 1991. And when I say Linux, it was created by a guy named Linus Torvalds. And so that's why it's called Linux. L-I-N is a direct reference to the creator's name. And what Linus Torvalds did was created a kernel. We talked about kernels before. And the kernel is the very core component, the main part of the operating system. So Linus Torvalds wrote a kernel, and when I say wrote, he wrote the programming, the code for the kernel. And then a community built around that kernel that he created and wrote different functionalities and different applications on top of that, creating not just one, but a great many operating systems. So when we say Linux, we don't mean a monolithic operating system like when we talk about Windows or Mac OS that's run by a single company. Linux actually refers to just the kernel on which there are countless what we call distributions. And each distribution is, in a way, its own operating system. So what we see on the screen here is Ubuntu. Ubuntu is one of the most popular distributions of Linux. And as you can see here, it looks a lot like Windows and Mac OS. And that is by design, because Ubuntu is a version of Linux or a distribution of Linux that was created for users who may not be computer programmers, who may not be tech savvy at all. It was created to be relatively easy to install and easy to use, using a visual language that most computer users, even beginner computer users, can understand. And Ubuntu is actually the version of Linux that I installed for my parents. And they don't know that they're using Ubuntu, but they are, and it works really well. And on the whole, it's a little bit more secure than some other operating systems. So we can do a very, very quick tour of this interface, and it's going to be a quick tour because it really is a lot similar to what we've already seen. So what we have on the top right-hand side is similar to a Mac. It has the time, the date, the volume control, the Wi-Fi, and it has a little power button. So if you click that, you'll be able to restart your computer. You'll be able to shut down your computer. It's really little, so I can understand it. If you're looking at your screen, you're gonna have to really, really squint. But I'll send this slideshow out to you next week, so you'll be able to zoom in the future if you would like to. On the left-hand side of the screen, you have what is actually looks very much like a dock on the Mac computer, and it functions in almost the same way. So I'm gonna draw this a little bit here. So what you can see right here, this is actually very similar to a start menu. So when you click here, it'll open up a box that'll show a bunch of your software, and it'll let you scroll through the different pieces of software that you have on your computer. And then here is the file manager. So if you click here, it'll show you your folders and your files. And then all of this down here are either programs that are currently open or are shortcuts that let you launch programs. So we have popular programs here like Google Drive, YouTube, which will open up the website to YouTube, Google Music, and Google Maps. We also have a trash can here. So as you can see, there's a lot of similarities between these operating systems. Now, while visually there are a lot of similarities, under the surface, these operating systems, of course, operate very differently. And that is some of what differentiates operating systems. Now, you can see Ubuntu looks like Windows and Mac, but there are a whole bunch, there are hundreds of different distributions of Linux, and some of them look nothing like Ubuntu or any other versions of any other operating systems. There are versions of Linux, and in fact, when I first saw Linux many years ago, more than a decade ago, a friend of mine who's a computer programmer showed me Linux. I asked him, hey, can you show me Linux? I've never seen what it actually looks like. And what did he show me? He opened up his computer, and it was just a command. There was a black screen, and it was just a command line. And I said, okay, I don't even know how to talk to this computer. And he said, oh, it's easy. You just learn a few commands, press help, and it'll do it for you. And I've since used command line many times, but at that time I was really confused and a little bit perturbed, because if you're a beginner user just getting this black screen with a little cursor, that's a little bit intimidating. So we've got a lot of questions. We're going to get to those questions very soon. All right, so this is Linux. So we're getting towards the end of our presentation here, and we're going to be answering your questions. So if you have questions you haven't put in the Q&A, please go ahead and do put them in the Q&A portion of your screen. But before we conclude, I really want to talk to you about what to consider when you're thinking about purchasing a new, when you're thinking about changing your operating system. So all of these things are important to consider. The first, I think, for most users, especially if you're not the type of person who wants to dig into your operating system. If you're just a person who wants to use the computer and not think about all the stuff in the background, ease of use. Many people love the Mac operating system because Apple's visual language, Apple's interface design is really easy to use. Once you learn how to use a Mac, you don't want to switch to other operating systems because Apple integrates so much different software that they create themselves into their operating system, making it a one-stop shop, making it really simple to start, even if you're a beginner. The next thing to consider is control. Now, we have a spectrum of what you can control in your operating system. On one side, we have operating systems like Windows and macOS, which let you control some things through a control panel. And if you're a developer, if you are really, really into computers, you can change a whole bunch of stuff in your operating system. And yet, even for advanced users, many things on Windows and macOS are locked down because Microsoft and Apple really want to have control over those things. On the other hand, many people love Linux. And by say many, I mean 5% of computer users worldwide, which is maybe a lot of people in terms of numbers, but in terms of market share, very, very low. Many people love Linux, including me, because many distributions of Linux let you control everything you see on your screen. They let you change not just what your desktop looks like, but how it operates under the hood. So all of those little applications that are running, controlling the way your desktop functions, the way a file manager functions, the way everything functions, is controllable on a Linux system. So if you are curious enough and you're interested in altering the way your computer operates, Linux lets you do that. And there are many help files online. There are many people who do it online that, there are some Linux distributions that you literally have to build your operating system from the ground up. Not for the faint of heart, but if you love fiddling around with computers, it's really the way to go. And if you want to learn about how operating systems work from the ground up, getting something like Arch Linux is a good way to go. Integration and compatibility is another consideration when it comes to choosing an operating system. So this also has a spectrum. So Windows is an operating system that's somewhere towards the middle because it's interoperable with many pieces. There's a lot of software that's available for Windows. Windows has its own software. You can run a lot of software from independent publishers on Windows. It's not very locked down. I mean, even computers that use Windows, PCs that use Windows, their plugs are pretty much standard. So its integration compatibility is pretty good. Now Apple is a little bit over to the more sort of lockdown side, even though now Macs have opened up a bit. Still, Mac computers we're talking about hardware here, tend to have their own proprietary plugs. So you have to buy a lot of adapters if you are interacting with other different computers. You have to buy adapters. Now, the operating system in some ways has the same kind of mood. In some ways, it's less interoperable with different systems, although that has changed over the years, and Apple has become a little bit more open in that regard. Now, if you want to be a Linux user, I would say that for software, you're a little bit out of luck because there's much more popular software developed for Windows and Mac than there is for Linux, primarily because of the amount of users. So there's some companies that create software for both for Linux or different Linux distributions and Mac and Windows, but if you're if you're just a regular user, you might find that some of the software that you use on a regular basis isn't actually available for Linux. And while there are ways around that, it's not necessarily for the beginner user. Stability. Most popular operating systems are very stable. Windows, Mac, the popular distributions of Linux like Ubuntu are very, very stable. You shouldn't have any problems with them crashing, at least not on a regular basis. Windows used to be known for crashing really often, and many people know about the blue screen of death, which is a blue screen that would occur all of a sudden on Windows systems with a whole bunch of random text on it. That doesn't happen very much anymore. And I would say for the most part, operating systems that you can get out of the box tend to be very stable. Safety is important. And for many, many years, Mac was seen as impregnable when it came to viruses and malware. And that is still true. Macs still tend to be safer when it comes to security than do Windows computers. But that has changed also over the years, and Mac users are still now vulnerable to viruses, to malware. Maybe not as much as Windows users. So if you're thinking about security, it pays to have an antivirus software. It pays to be careful about what you download. It pays to be careful what USB sticks you put into your computer, whether you're a Windows or a Mac user. And we've had other programs about that, about being safe on your computer. And we have other programs coming up about staying safe on your computer. Now, if you're a Linux user, your safety is very much in your hands, although there's security applications for Linux. You really have to know how to use them yourself and really protect yourself. Although I would say that there are not as many hackers that try to hack Linux systems on a wide scale. They might be hacking one specific computer, but not necessarily like all Linux computers. So, because there's so many Windows computers, there are hackers that create viruses that tend to spread on Windows computers. It's not as much worth it to do that for Linux computers, at least for individual users. Now, Linux operates a lot of servers too, so it becomes a little bit more complicated. But when it comes to Linux, a lot of things are in your hands. Now, price is something that most people don't think about when it comes to operating systems. And the reason for that is because operating systems tend to just come pre-installed on the computers that you would purchase from Best Buy or Staples or wherever you buy your computer. And so you don't have to think about the cost of Windows. You don't have to think about the cost of Mac OS. But if you want to buy those operating systems, they do have a cost associated with them. Linux, on the other hand, most Linux distributions tend to be totally free because they are built using an open source model. Open source is a term that literally means that the source code is available for any person to see. So if you are curious, you can download the Linux kernel and see the code that runs it. Whether you can understand it or not is another question. I know that if I would look at it, I wouldn't necessarily be able to understand it. But because it's using this open source model, it means it was developed by a community of programmers who have a stake in keeping Linux free. And so while there exist Linux distributions that cost money, the majority of Linux distributions, because they're free and open source, remain available at no cost. And I put on the very bottom, what to consider with operating systems. Fun? And the truth is that, I'm a person who likes to tinker with computers. It's just why I use Linux on my personal computer. I like to change distributions every so often just to give my brain a little workout and just to see how different operating systems work. I enjoy taking tours of different operating systems because for me, considering the aesthetics, the different visual language, the different ways to interact is a exciting mind bender. And also just to see the different features operating systems have. Software developers, interface designers, all do a wonderful and interesting job in developing their operating systems. And really, the way they do that changes the way we behave with computers. So one example of that is when the iPhone first came out. It wasn't just the hardware that changed the way we thought about computers and the way we thought about interacting with computers. It was also the operating system that was on that iPhone that introduced new ways of interacting with computers with us. For example, swiping wasn't always something that you did on a cell phone. It was introduced by somebody and programmed into an operating system. So those are the things to consider with operating systems. Of course, the library has many, many resources that can teach you about operating systems, everything from how to program an operating system, how to understand that kernel, to just using for example, Mac OS Monterey or Linux or Windows 11. What we have here is only 5 ebooks and books, but really there are hundreds and hundreds out there. So if you're interested in learning about the operating system that you have or some other operating system at any level, do search our catalog, and you'll very likely find what you're looking for. And if you have questions, you can let us know in the chat or in the Q&A, or you can email me and I'll try to help you out. Of course, if you have questions that you want to ask, as long as they're not extremely tech heavy, you can always contact your local library by phone. You can contact the library as a whole by text via the number on the screen, 626-394-4019, Monday through Friday, 12 to 6, so in the afternoon. You can email the library. The email address is down in this lacountylibrary.org/contact us. You go there, you can email us, you can email the library as a whole, or you can chat with us via our website. So similar to the text chat, but you go to lacountylibrary.org/contact us, and there's a little chat window, Monday through Friday, 12 to 6 p.m. And that takes us to the end of our presentation. And now I'm very happy to take your questions. Hopefully I'll be able to answer them. I don't know. We'll see.
Before we get started with our Q&A, I wanted to let everyone know, thank you for your chats and your questions. But if you are looking into our next week's program, we will have, one moment, drum roll please. Advanced Google search. It is an effective way to find information that's out there. So we're going to have that next week on July 28th at 11 a.m. And then on August 4th, we have how to get free ebooks. So that is going to do a search and explore with Overdrive, Hoopla, Press Reader, Project Gutenberg, and so much more. So that's going to be August 4th, and I'll be putting the links to register in the chat. But let's go ahead and get started with our Q&A.
I'll be back next week with Advanced Google Search, and I'm very, very excited about teaching you how to upgrade your search skills. This is something that librarians love to do, and as a librarian, I'm excited about teaching you Advanced Google Search. We'll also talk about some other search engines that you may not know about. So
I always like to tell my friends that, you know how you have a lawyer on retainer? I like to tell my friends that they have a librarian on retainer.
yeah, if you need somebody to do research, if you need somebody to help you with the research. So actually, let me cover a few questions in the chat before we get into the Q&A, because I'm afraid I'm going to miss these if we don't get these. So why did you decide to explain that an OS is so old? Oh, I think I put the dates that that operating systems are founded just for fun. I mean, there's no real no difference if an operating system like macOS is 20 years old and Windows is 40 years old, or Linux was founded in 1981. I think it's just fun information to have. It doesn't affect the quality of the operating system, because it's had many different versions of that operating system since that time.
It is something that I do like about Mac, though, is that I have a Mac that is 10 plus years old, and I recently turned it on and it still works. The only thing is that the hardware, like the laptop itself, is so old that I do have to add more memory to it in order for me to add the latest OS. But my Mac still works. it still works. So even if we're talking about old stuff, like that's something I do like about Mac, is that they're still very functional.
Yeah, my wife's old computer that a friend of mine gave me many, many years ago is actually I'm sitting at a table right now that it's sitting right there. I'm looking at it right now. That computer, if I turn it on, it'll still work. It's a Mac. Um, it may not use, be able to access everything on the internet because the internet changes. New capabilities are created using different browsers. But if we upgrade it, it'll probably still do a fine job. So let's see. Why choose Linux over Windows or Mac OS? Well, the reason for me is because it's fun to use a different operating system, because it's free, because there's many different Linux distributions to choose from them. So depending on what you want your system to do, uh, you can create, there's a Linux distribution created specifically for that functionality. Linux, some Linux distributions tend to use less resources on your computer. So if you have an old computer, installing a simpler or more minimal version of Linux allows you to use that computer with flying speed, or blazing speed. Even if your computer is 20 years old, there are some Linux distributions that will work perfectly on it. Also because Linux gives you control. And I like having control of the behaviors my computer does. And so for me, I don't mind the friction that comes with using an operating system that may not be totally finished, or that may not be as smooth as Windows or Mac, but because I like that control. And I, for one, don't mind looking up things online all the time. I don't mind having to figure out stuff about how to do things on my operating system all the time. So it's okay with me if it's not as easy as 1, 2, 3. All right, let's see. Um,
So in the Q&A, our first question is, what is the best operating system and for what purposes is more efficient? I feel like you kind of answered that question.
Yeah, it's really hard to,
Yeah.
it's really hard to know that, because it depends on what you're trying to do. And I just mentioned, why would I choose Linux
Hmm.
over Mac? I would say for most people, don't do it. I mean, Linux is not the operating system for you unless you have somebody to help you with it. But for somebody like me, I love it, and I've been using it for many years on my personal computers.
What
So
I've
yeah.
realized is like when it just depends on what I'm using it for. For school, it made more sense when I was going through my master's, it made more sense for me to get a Windows because what they were using for my school was not compatible with my Mac. They wanted us to have Windows. So it just didn't make sense for me to one, upgrade my MacBook and have it work on a Windows. I had to do a lot of stuff in order for it to work versus I could just get something that was more budget friendly and not buy a MacBook and start from scratch. So you have to
Yeah.
look at what you want out of your Mac OS, even your like even your hardware. So those are things that you have to look into. But like right now, I just got this MacBook Pro for work. And for editing videos, for doing programs, this is amazing. My MacBook
Yeah.
is amazing to have. So,
Designers, video editors, people
mhm,
who are in the arts tend to like Mac computers. Some for some people it's because they're more aesthetically pleasing, but
yeah,
also because they tend to be better at doing those kind of functions. They tend to be better at video editing. They tend to be better at graphic design.
yeah. So it's all what's the word? It all depends on you,
Yeah.
what you're looking for.
Yeah, Mac computers tend to hold your hand more. So if you're a beginner user and you like to, and you like everything integrated, you like everything to be pretty simple to use, Macs are great for that. They're also more expensive. So that's something else to consider.
Hmm.
So let's see. Um, can Google Docs do all that Microsoft Word can do? So this is this question that doesn't necessarily relate to a program. I'm going to answer it really quickly. Google Docs cannot do everything that Microsoft Word can do. Microsoft Word has quite a bit more functionality. Same thing with Excel versus Sheets. Excel is a lot more powerful than Sheets, and there are reasons for that. And actually, isn't that our program next week? No, in 2
No,
weeks, in next
n-
month.
next month. I'm
Yeah,
I'm
you're
that's
doing
me.
it. Yeah,
And me.
you and Connor.
Yes.
That's right. So yeah, so stick around until
I was
August.
about to say I'm looking for the exact date because you just sent me the.
It's on August 9, 11th, August 18th, I think.
Ah.
Yeah, it's August 18th.
Yes, it's Microsoft Office and Google. It's called Intro to Microsoft Office and Google Docs, and it's on August 18th.
Yep.
Mhm.
So
So
at that point, Adriana will tell you what Microsoft Office can do, what Google Docs can do, or
but
Google
I
Drive.
believe if you do not want to wait, on our YouTube channel, we do have one that was conducted by our Martin.
Yeah, Martin did
Yeah,
that one.
Martin. So if you go to YouTube and go to our playlist for digital literacy, you'll see all of our past events, and I'm going to post the link in the chat in a little bit. But you'll see all of our past programs, including Google Docs and Microsoft. I mean,
And
in
then
Google Docs, I forgot. Yeah,
and
Microsoft.
Microsoft Office, yeah. Adriana, can you go to our events calendar and throw a link to your program, to
Yeah.
your Microsoft Office program in there? Because I put it into our web calendar this morning, so
Oh,
it
okay.
should be there if you go to virtual events.
I will do that.
Okay, next question here is a kernel what we know as the machine language? And the answer is that it is not. So assembly language is the very basic language that a computer speaks. So it's like it's machine language. So current kernels tend not to be written in machine language solely. They may have some in there, but for instance, the Linux kernel, I believe, is written in the C programming language. So it's not, the programming language is distinct from what a kernel is. A kernel is a piece of software, whereas a language is something that writes that software. What are the best features a Mac has that Windows does not, but is useful? Oh, that's a great question. And I can't answer that question because I can give you some general ideas, and Adrian and I have talked about some general things, some general differences, but going down a feature list is not something that I can do right now, partially because there's so many of features, and partially because the features change depending on the version of the operating system that is used. So I can give you some information now, and that information may be outdated when the next version of the Mac operating system or Windows comes out. Is a Mac and an Apple the same? So Apple is the company that creates a Mac or Macintosh. A Macintosh is a type of Apple, which is deliberate. So yeah, Apple is the company. Mac is what a computer, what an actual physical computer used to be called
It's
now.
kind of like Honda is the company, and all their different cars are the different
Yeah.
devices. So Apple is the company. The different devices are your Apple Watch, the iPad, MacBook Pro, MacBook Thin,
Oh yeah,
paper.
that's right. The Air.
Yeah, yeah, Air. I'm like
Yeah.
thin. Like,
It is.
yeah, like it is thin. So those are the different devices. So Apple is the company, and then all the other devices are like the cars.
Yep. Are apps just on laptops or iPads, not on a desktop? This is a really great question because the software, it's all software. So it's all computer programs. Um, Computer programs on a desktop used to be called programs or just software. And then at some point down the line, when smartphones came about, when tablets came about, those applications started to be called apps. So it's all the same thing. An app is simply an application or a piece of software. So it doesn't matter whether it's on a desktop, on a phone, or on a computer. We had a question, is this the first Windows? Wow. So what I showed, Windows 3.1, not actually the first Windows. There are Windows before that. So you can go online and look at screenshots of Windows 3.0 and theoretically Windows 2.0 and 1.0, but Windows 3.1 was effectively the sort of coming out for Windows. I'm curious what Linux is and if it is better than the other two Mac or Windows. So I think we did, Adrian, we covered that, right?
Yes.
I think we covered
It just
that kind of
depends.
stuff.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Depends on
better
what you're
is not
using.
really the right way to think about it. It's more like what's better for you.
Yeah. So like let's say for example, I like to do road trips. So it's not necessarily that Honda Civic is a bad car or that it's better than Jeep. It's just a Jeep would be better suited to my road trip needs.
Yep.
So that's what we mean by you have to look at what your needs are, what your budget is, what
How much of a tinkerer are you?
yeah, how much of it, yeah, like do you want to have more control like Oleg was saying? I don't. I want someone to hold my hand. Hold
Yeah.
my hand.
I mean, because it's a trade-off. You get control at the trade-off of having more friction when you use your computer.
Mhm.
Of all three systems, which one can have the best processors, the best memory, storage, RAM, or external memory? Which is better for graphics and software in general? So we have a distinction here between hardware and software.
Mhm.
And the answer is, this is not a question that necessarily makes sense, because you can have any kind of processor, memory storage, RAM, external memory, either a lot or little, fast, slow, regardless of which operating system you use. So it's not that those things don't necessarily um, go together. Now, Apple used to have their own type of processor, and I think they still have some sort of proprietary processor, but they also use Intel. So it's not really something that one needs to consider necessarily.
Mhm.
Is it smart to use virtual operating systems within another operating system? Does that compromise memory or processor speed? So when we talk about virtual operating systems, this questioner might be talking about something called a virtual machine. A virtual machine is a piece of software that you launch on top of an operating system that can then run inside it another operating system. It's just so it's like you're running software on top of on top of other software. And does it compromise memory processor speed? Well, yeah, because you're running an
Mhm.
operating system, you're running another one on top of it. So yes, does that mean you can't use the computer? Does that mean that your computer use is going to be affected? Not necessarily, because if you have a computer that's fast enough that can handle that kind of load, then you may be able to use the operating system you use within the virtual machine without any kind of decrease in speed or performance. So we had a question, how to get and use the pencil icon that you used in this webinar. So that's an annotate feature. So when you share on Zoom, when you share a screen, there's a little bar, a menu bar that appears. And on that bar, there's a little icon called annotate. You click on that icon and it gives you some options to draw on your screen and do all sorts of other things. So that's how you use that. We don't use it that often, but I really like it, and a few people have mentioned that I should use it more,
I should
and I
use it
think I
more.
will. Yeah.
Yeah. I always forget about it, but yeah.
Let's see. Which one has the most variety of peripherals you can connect to, or you can install peripheral cards easily on them? Okay, so
I
yeah,
know someone
yeah,
I know someone earlier asked what is a peripheral. Can you
yes. I did. I think I covered that before, but I'm going to
you
do it
did?
again. Yeah, a peripheral is something that you connect to your computer, like a printer. Like a monitor is technically a peripheral as well, but it's something that's sort of peripheral means. Oh yeah, the mouse, of course.
Mhm.
A peripheral means isn't a peripheral something on the periphery. So it's something's like on the border. So you have your computer box, which has the motherboard, and all the different cards inside there, all the different stuff like memory. And a peripheral is something that you connect that computer box. So which one has the most variety of peripherals you can? This is also a slightly complicated question, uh, because you can connect peripherals to, if you're talking about Windows or Mac, you can connect most things that you can buy in Best Buy and it'll work with those things. Now, there's a piece of software called a driver. A driver is software that allows your operating system to interact with your peripheral. So there's a piece of software that lets your computer understand what your printer is doing. It's that driver is usually created by the company that creates your printer. So if you have an Epson printer, Epson will create a driver for your printer. So that driver will be installed on your computer, and it'll make that connection. Now, there are also drivers that come by default on operating systems that'll let you that'll connect with those peripherals without you having to do anything. Or there's now, operating systems will automatically download the driver for you. And it behooves the hardware manufacturers to create drivers that are easily obtainable, because this is how the people who buy their hardware how their computers will be able to connect to those drivers and understand what they're saying. So the easy answer to the question, this kind of one sentence answer, is that with Windows and Mac, you're fine. I mean, most things that you can buy in Best Buy or Staples will connect to your computer and will be understood. There's drivers available. Now for Linux, sometimes there are not drivers available for certain pieces of hardware. And so that's also because their market share is relatively small. There are some hardware manufacturers that don't create drivers for Linux. And now, that said, there are software programmers that have created drivers, or kind of reverse engineer drivers, that will let you connect to a certain type of printer. If Epson, for example, has not written a driver for this Epson printer to talk to Linux, to this whatever Linux distribution you're using, somebody might have been, well, I have this printer, I really want to do it, and they'll create it by themselves, and then that driver will exist. That doesn't always happen, so I would say that that's one of those things. There's one of those friction points when you're using certain Linux distributions. There aren't drivers that will connect to every piece of hardware that you can have. I'm talking fast. I'm sorry if I'm using terms that may not be immediately understandable to everybody, but feel free, post in the chat if I use a word that you don't understand, and I'll try to do my best to explain. So Linux is a distribution of different mini operating systems in one grand operating system. Not exactly. Linux is a kernel, so it's a core concept on top of which many people have written additional applications and packaged as operating systems. So there are many operating systems that use the Linux kernel, and they're collectively known as Linux distributions. So there's a Linux distribution called Ubuntu. There's a Linux distribution called Linux Mint. There's a Linux distribution called Fedora. And each of these all have the Linux kernel at their core, and these other pieces of applications that are packaged with it that make up an operating system. Which operating system is better for computer programmers and why? Well, I think you would have to ask the computer programmer, although a lot of computer programmers, more computer programmers use Linux than just regular computer users, just because computer programmers tend to be people who are really into computers and like to fiddle around with their computers. But it depends on what you're doing. I mean, when you program in a language like Python, it really doesn't matter which computer you use. It doesn't matter whether you're using Linux or macOS, because yeah, it doesn't really make a difference. So let's see here. Is Chrome OS on Chromebooks considered a safe OS? Yes, it is. Yeah, Chrome OS is a popular, reputable operating system that's built by Google that tends to be safe. And one consideration with Chrome is that Chrome OS is really a kind of a terminal. It's a system that harkens back to when computers were terminals, where a lot of the processing was done offsite, and you basically interacted with a mainframe computer. So what Chrome OS is it's kind of a layer to interact with other software that's on the internet. So it's hard to, I don't know if it's even possible to use Chrome OS without an internet connection. I think it probably is possible to a certain extent, but Chrome OS really is a connection to web-based software. But yeah, I would generally speaking, yeah, I would say that it's safe. How do you buy a Linux computer? Is it expensive than Windows or Mac? So Linux is an operating system that can be installed on a computer. You can buy computers with Linux installed. I know that Dell offers an option for you to have Linux pre-installed on your computer. And there are other companies that create laptops that are the packaged laptops. Like I think System 76 is one of them, or I think it's 76, that creates Windows computers. I mean, it creates Linux computers. So there are some companies that create computers. Red Hat is a company that creates computers. I don't know if Red Hat actually sells computers anymore. I think they might just be a consulting company now. But you can buy a computer with Linux pre-installed. Although I would say that many people just buy like this. When I bought a computer a couple of years ago, I bought a Dell computer with Windows on it, and I erased Windows. Well, I didn't actually erase Windows. What I actually did was created a dual boot computer. So I choose when I turn on my computer whether it boots into Windows or whether it boots into Linux. But in the past, what I've done is created computers that I would buy a regular computer with Windows or whatever on it and erase Windows. I would format my hard drive, which means I would erase everything off my hard drive, and then I would install Windows. I would install Linux on it, so it would be start fresh. Oh man. Which one is going to outlive the other in the long term, in your opinion? Windows. Windows, Mac OS, and Linux are going to be around for a pretty long time. And the reason for that is Microsoft and Apple are giant companies, and Linux is created by the people. So there are, and support tends to be supported by big companies too. So I think all of them are going to be around for a long time. Linux distributions vary. There are some distributions that are very strong now that may not be as strong in 10 years. That really depends. But I would say all three of these operating systems, or all three of these kernels, are going to exist for a pretty long time. There is more free software available in Windows than all the other two. Yeah, maybe. Windows is the most popular operating system, so people tend to write software on it. I don't know if there's more free software available for it, but there's plenty in any case. What is the best security protection on a Windows computer? Adriana, do you want to take it? I've been answering a lot of questions. Do you want to take that one?
Which is the best security protection on Windows computer? I don't know the answer to that one though.
It's a hard question to answer because it's like the question is, which is the best antivirus program?
Yeah. That's something I like about Mac, is that I didn't really have to worry about it. Mac kind of has, like, that's what I mean by holding your hand, is that I know that Mac has their own antivirus thing. I don't know what it's called, but I know they have it.
Yeah.
Versus when I had Windows, I remember I had McAfee.
Well, no. Let me stop you for a second, because
Okay.
Microsoft does have Windows Defender, which is
okay. Yeah, you're right.
Windows Defender comes pre-installed by default on Windows systems now. So,
but I remember I always had to get that Norton virus. When you brought it up, I was like, oh yeah, I remember I used to have to buy that. I remember I used to have to. So it just depends. Like,
the best security protection is for an individual to be careful about what they download and the websites they visit and who they give access to their computer. That
and
you're the number one protector of your computer.
And go through our digital literacy, because we talk about security. So make sure you look into that. The book for Windows for seniors is not on ebook. No, that was a book. So we so in the resources, we just picked a few of the books. There's a lot of books, like Oleg had mentioned, and that's why we recommended either going through our instant librarian, where you can ask for more books, or you can go to your local branch and have an opportunity with our reference librarians, or you can go through our catalog and type in Windows operating systems, or and they'll have a list. When we compiled this resources, there were a lot to choose from, even different years. I just put the most recent ones, but if you have an old operating system, you can also look back on to see what we have available.
Mhm.
I'm currently Windows 10. When would I need to upgrade to Windows 11? So that depends on you.
Yeah, I
That
mean,
depends on you. I have even on phones, I have friends who have not updated their phones because they like that version of their iPhone. Uh, and so it is your choice when you want to upgrade or not. What I do know is that I can use this as an example is like I said with my old Mac, there are things that I can't upgrade. So for example, I'm using an older version of Chrome. I can't update any further because my operating system is not up to date.
mm,
So it does lag, but I don't want to spend money on updating it. Like I have my iPad and I can use that. I just needed more somewhere to put my pictures in. So I was like,
mm,
oh, let me grab my MacBook. So it just depends on you.
yep. Okay. What search engine is used with Linux? Any search engine can be used with Linux. And the reason for that is because Linux is the operating system. Just like Windows and Mac OS, you use a web browser on top of the operating system to access the internet. And within that web browser, you can go to google.com, you can go to yahoo.com, you can use Bing, you can use any search engine with Linux. It's not, there's no connection between the search engine and the operating system that you use.
So quick reminder, if you were late to our program or you have to leave, this program is being recorded. And so it is going to be uploaded to our YouTube channel. And at the end, in probably next week, we'll send an email that includes the slides and the link to our YouTube video. And in the video, during the chat, there are no subtitles, but on YouTube, subtitles will be available.
They'll be auto-generated by YouTube, but
Yeah,
yes,
auto-generated.
you can
Yes.
turn them on.
And someone did mention something about a transcript. I believe I talked about it in one of my programs for YouTube for beginners. I talked about how you can actually access the transcript on YouTube. So there's a lot of information out there, but we are trying our best to have all of this available so it's easy for you guys to learn and enjoy all the services that are available for us.
Mhm. Yeah, I learned about the transcript that's available on YouTube from your program. So thanks,
I
Adriana.
I learned about it too during my research.
So the next question here. So could I install Linux Ubuntu on an older computer? Please confirm. The answer is it depends on how old. If it's 30 years old, maybe you want to use a little different Linux distribution. But yeah, generally you can install Linux on an older computer as long as, well, like I said, it depends how old it is. But yeah, there are either Ubuntu or other Linux distributions that are a little bit more minimal that work well on computers without the sort of the high power that current computers have. I know I mean, I had a 10-year-old or 12-year-old Dell laptop that I installed a very small version of Linux on called a very minimal called Puppy Linux. Wouldn't recommend it for beginners, but yeah, it worked really well. It worked super fast. Do you have any specific type of focuses, different Linux distributions? So yeah, I mentioned that different Linux distributions focus on different things. So can I give some examples of that? The answer is yes. So even if we look at Ubuntu, under Ubuntu's umbrella, there are different Ubuntu flavors. So there is Ubuntu Studio for people who are creatives who like to do video editing, who like to write, who like to do digital art. It comes pre-installed with free software for doing that kind of stuff. And I don't know if it accelerates hardware, if it has certain um, under the hood capabilities that make those things faster, but I wouldn't be surprised if it did. So Ubuntu Studio is one of the examples. There is a flavor of Ubuntu called Ubuntu Mate, and that's good for tablets, good for phones, good for really, really slow computers. So stuff like that. There are also Linux distributions that are specific for streaming video, that have certain capability for streaming video. There are certain Linux distributions that are good for running a server, that are more ideal for running a server. So a Linux distribution could be as simple as just a command line, and then you put whatever you want on it, whatever kind of software. And the reason that can be beneficial to some people is because your computer will be running as fast as it could, or as fast as it can, without all the distractions of the things you don't need. Is Chrome OS a subsidiary of Windows OS? No, Chrome OS is created by Google. Windows is created by Microsoft. So the two have no connection. They're created by different companies. Let's see. So we're getting towards the end of our questions here, which is great. I really appreciate all of the questions that folks have asked. I have HP. I use Chrome OS. I should have access to Windows OS as well. I'm not sure what the question is. It depends on what kind of computer, what kind of computer it is. But Windows may not be installed on that computer. Oh, we got a question in the chat. What search engine is best to use? Come to the program next week and we can talk all about that.
I am adding a link to our previous Browser Basics event that we had. So wait, is that the one Browser Basics? Is that what it was called? Browser Basics?
Yeah, we did do it on Browser Basics.
Yeah, okay. So I'll be adding that link in the chat.
Having an HP, what protector do I have using Chrome OS? So the company of the computer, so like HP or Dell, that doesn't really matter that much, because that tends to be the hardware. So your operating system is built on top of the hardware. So the operating system itself is more important. And if you, by protector, you mean like what antivirus software you should have, with Chrome OS, I don't believe that you really even need an antivirus software, because the way the system is organized, it tends to be pretty specific what you can install on there. So you would have, I think, the vulnerability of Chrome OS tends to be a little bit smaller than other operating systems, just because it doesn't have as many functions. It's sort of organized in a different way than other operating systems. Okay, so that's all the questions that I see in the Q&A portion of the screen.
So in the chat, somebody wanted to see the resource slide really quick.
Sure. Yeah, I can bring that up. And then of course, yeah, as you know, we're going to send it out. So it is right here. So let me make that big. Oh, review. There it is. Okay. Did we miss any questions that were in the chat? Because there's things moving in the chat really quickly. And
yeah. Do you have a workshop that goes more in detail about recommended basics to consider when buying a computer?
we do not. We do have a computers, the very basics program, which tells you all about, like we talked about peripherals earlier. We talked about all the different kind of peripherals. It talks about what's inside the computer, what's inside that box. Do we make purchasing recommendations during that program? We do not. And the reason for that, and I think Adriana, you touched on it earlier, is because it really depends on what the price point you're looking for is. It depends on what kind of functionality you're looking for. It depends on what kind of user you are. So it would be really a one-on-one thing more than a one on, we had, I don't know, 140 people at this program, one on 140, because I can give advice on how to buy computers, but that advice would be good for, 10% of the people in the audience, and then the other 90% would have totally different reasons that they're buying a computer and totally different expectations for their computer.
Yes. I think you hit the nail right there. Like, what are your expectations? Like, what you want out of it? All of those are you have to consider. Like just yesterday, I bought an app for my iPad because I write my notes on my iPad, and I had to decide between two apps. I'm like, oh, this one has a free version, this one's a paid version. But I get this out of this, and I don't get this out of this. So those are things that I have to ask myself these questions. So whenever you're buying an app or a device like a iPhone, or if it's going to be a Android, or if it's going to be an iPad versus a tablet, you have to ask yourself those questions, like, what is it that you want out of it? How much can I afford? Or do I want to splurge? So those are different things that you have to answer for yourself. We can cover information, and you take that information how it fits in your lifestyle.
Yeah, it's really hard to give recommendations just for,
Mm-hmm.
in a virtual program, especially
Yes,
for items like this, just because there's so many options and so many different price
so
points
many.
and different ideas of quality. But I mean, there are a lot of reviews online too. So when
Mhm.
you figure out what your needs are, then it's easier to to understand that.
So someone actually has a very good question. It's not related to the program exactly, but
Okay.
when do we use chat and when do we use Q&A?
Yeah.
That is a great, great question.
Yeah,
So,
I answer that in the chat, but go ahead, you take it.
oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah, but you can, but to know, because that is a good question for everybody
It's
out there to know.
for
So yeah,
everybody. There is no really wrong or right answer. But however, in the Q&A for us, it looks a lot neater. And so we visually can see the question, and we can either type the question in. So if it's like a question like, I need the phone number to this program, I can just put it in the Q&A, and you'll see the answer. In the chat, we kind of have to look for the questions, but we are looking, and we can see the questions like, oh, here's a question. So in a Q&A, it's a lot easier to view the question and answers. We can either type the question in, and it tells us whether or not we answered that question. So if there's like three questions about the same thing, we can just remove those questions and answer it live.
yeah,
So there is no right or wrong way to ask a question. We will try and get to all of them. And the only thing is that we're limited to time.
yeah.
So it's not that we're not answering a question, it's more that we don't have time to answer the
Yeah,
question.
or I mean, if it's
Yeah.
a question that's really out there, or if there's that's super specific,
Hmm.
yeah, sometimes we can address questions that are like, my computer has this happening. Can you help me troubleshoot? No, because I can't see what's happening on there, and I can't really address that question in the best way I could if I was, for example, standing behind you or on your computer trying to figure it out. Or if the question's like, we're doing a program on operating systems, and the question is, what coat is best to buy for the winter season? I do not know. But also, yeah, it's like, if we're talking about operating systems, and somebody wants to go really, really deep on Microsoft Word, we'll do that during a different program, but not during this one. So for me, the answer that the simple answer to the original question, which is when to best use the Q&A and when to use the chat, is the Q&A is best for
Hmm.
questions. So when you have a
Yeah.
question like, what is the weather in China right now? There's probably many weathers in China because China is so big, but what is the weather in this place? That's a Q&A. Or what operating system do you like the best? That's a Q&A.
Hmm.
If you, on the other hand, if you want to leave a comment like, I really like so and so operating system, or if you want to respond to a question that we ask, so like when I asked about what operating system do you use, that's best to use a chat, because we can scroll through that and go, okay, cool, yeah, I see the question. Or if
Hmm.
somebody has an answer to something or a correction to something that we've said, I can scroll and through the chat and not miss that easily. But for questions, yeah, Q&A is by far the best.
Yeah. But we will try to look for it in the
Mhm.
chat.
Yeah, I mean, we try to answer all the questions that we can,
Hmm.
just because that's why we're here. We'll tell you stuff, but we really want to be able to tell you the stuff that you're interested in learning. And so with that, I really want to actually post the post-event survey.
Oh, yeah.
So I'm gonna throw in the post-event survey link into the chat, and the post-event survey is a very, very short survey that we send after all of our programs. And the purpose of the post-event survey is for you to give us your feedback on how this event went, what we could do better, what we did very well, and what topics you're interested in us covering in the future. We look at that, we respond to that, and we create our programs based on what you're interested in.
A lot of my programs were inspired during the Q&A.
Yeah, so here is
Mhm.
the post-event survey. There you go. So you click on that. It literally takes 2 minutes. There's only 3 questions on there. So if you have time, please fill that out. And Adriana, would you like to take us out?
Yes. So quick reminder, this event is being recorded. It will be posted on YouTube. An email will be sent out with the link to the event and the PDF, and the slides as a PDF. And it will have more information about all of our future programs that I will be featured in. So we will see you all next week. Thank you and bye, everyone.